The scream that tore through the Henderson household at dawn wasn't coming from the person who should have been screaming. Eleanor Henderson bolted upright in her bed, clutching her left arm and crying out in agony, while 3 miles away, her twin sister Catherine lay unconscious in a tobacco field, with that same arm crushed beneath a fallen wagon wheel. No one in the Henderson home knew about the accident yet. No one could explain why Eleanor felt every excruciating moment of her sister's injury as if it were happening to her own body. This was Virginia in 1853, a world of plantations and strict social hierarchies, where science and superstition walked hand in hand. The Henderson family owned a modest farm outside Richmond, respectable but not wealthy. Their 2 daughters raised to be proper young women who would marry well and maintain their social standing. Eleanor and Catherine had been inseparable since birth, identical in appearance with auburn hair and green eyes, but their connection went far deeper than physical resemblance. Eleanor's mother, Margaret Henderson, rushed into the bedroom to find her daughter rocking back and forth, tears streaming down her face, cradling her left arm as if it were broken. "Eleanor, what's happened? Did you fall from bed?" "It's Catherine," Eleanor gasped, her voice thick with pain. "Something terrible has happened to Catherine. Her arm, Mother, her arm is crushed." Margaret felt ice spread through her veins. This had happened before. These inexplicable moments when one twin seemed to know exactly what was happening to the other, despite the distance between them. When they were 10 years old and Catherine had fallen from a tree, Eleanor had cried out at the exact moment her sister's ankle twisted. When Catherine caught scarlet fever at 15, Eleanor developed the same fever symptoms, despite never being exposed to the illness. The local physician, Dr. Samuel Morrison, had dismissed these incidents as coincidence or hysteria, the fashionable diagnosis for any female ailment that defied easy explanation. But Margaret knew better. She had watched her daughters their entire lives, seen the way they moved in synchronization, finished each other's sentences, woke from the same dreams. Whatever connected them was real, even if no one could explain it. "Your father rode to the Mitchell plantation an hour ago," Margaret said, helping Eleanor sit up. "Catherine went there yesterday to help with the harvest preparations. I'll send Thomas immediately." Thomas, their farmhand, was dispatched on horseback while Margaret tended to Eleanor, who continued to describe sensations she couldn't possibly be experiencing herself. She felt the weight of something heavy on her arm, the sharp pain of bone grinding against bone, the warm wetness of blood. Margaret wrapped Eleanor's arm in cool cloths and administered laudanum, but nothing eased the pain. 45 minutes later, Thomas returned with news that confirmed Eleanor's words with terrifying accuracy. Catherine had been helping load tobacco onto a wagon when the wheel broke loose, pinning her left arm beneath it. She was unconscious when they found her, her arm badly crushed. The Mitchell family physician was with her now, but her condition was grave. Margaret immediately ordered their carriage prepared. Eleanor, despite her own mysterious pain, insisted on going. "I need to be with her," she said, her voice weak but determined. "When we're together, it's not as bad. The connection, whatever it is, it helps us both." The ride to the Mitchell plantation took nearly an hour along rutted dirt roads still muddy from recent rain. Eleanor clutched her arm the entire way, occasionally crying out when the pain intensified. Margaret watched her daughter with a mixture of fear and fascination. The medical community would call this hysteria or female delicacy, dismiss it as imagination run wild. But Margaret had raised these girls. She knew what she was witnessing was real, even if it defied every scientific principle of the age. The Mitchell plantation was one of the largest in the region, its main house a testament to tobacco wealth. They were ushered inside by servants who had been warned of their arrival. Dr. James Patterson, a stern man in his 60s with wire-rimmed spectacles and an air of absolute certainty, met them in the entrance hall. "Mrs. Henderson," he said, his tone grave, "so your daughter's injury is severe. The arm is badly crushed. I've given her chloroform for the pain, but I'm afraid the damage is extensive. There's a very real possibility we'll need to amputate to prevent infection and gangrene." Margaret felt the world tilt. Beside her, Eleanor collapsed, her legs giving out as if she had received a physical blow. The doctor moved to help her, but Eleanor pushed him away weakly. "Take me to Catherine," she whispered. "Please, I need to be with my sister." Dr. Patterson looked confused, glancing between Eleanor's pained face and Margaret's determined expression. "Madam, I don't think it's wise for her to see her sister in this condition. The shock could be too much." "Doctor," Margaret said firmly, "you don't understand. Take us to Catherine now." Catherine lay in an upstairs bedroom, her face pale as morning mist, her crushed left arm wrapped in blood-soaked bandages. Mrs. Elizabeth Mitchell, a gracious woman in her 40s who had known the Henderson family for years, sat beside the bed, periodically dabbing Catherine's forehead with a damp cloth. The room smelled of carbolic acid and fear, the heavy curtains drawn against the morning sun. When Eleanor entered, supported by her mother, something extraordinary happened. Both sisters opened their eyes simultaneously, despite Catherine being heavily sedated with chloroform. Their gazes locked across the room, and Eleanor felt the pain in her own arm immediately lessen, as if the burden was being shared rather than duplicated. Dr. Patterson watched this exchange with skepticism poorly concealed. "Miss Henderson," he addressed Eleanor, "I understand your concern for your sister, but you appear to be in distress yourself. Are you unwell?" Eleanor ignored him, moving to Catherine's bedside and taking her sister's right hand. Catherine's fingers closed weakly around hers. "Ellie," she whispered, using the childhood nickname only she was allowed to use. "You felt it, didn't you?" "Every moment," Eleanor confirmed, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I knew something was wrong the instant it happened." Dr. Patterson cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with this display. "Mrs. Henderson, I must speak with you about your daughter's condition. The severity of the crush injury means that amputation is likely necessary. The bones are shattered, the tissue severely damaged. If we don't act quickly, infection will set in, and she could develop septicemia. I've seen men die from less severe injuries during the war in Mexico." Margaret felt her heart contract. The thought of Catherine losing her arm was unbearable, but the thought of losing Catherine entirely was impossible to comprehend. Isn't there any other option? Any way to save the arm? "In my 30 years of medical practice, I've never seen such an injury heal properly," Dr. Patterson said. "The risk of infection is too great. I recommend we proceed with the amputation this afternoon before fever sets in." Eleanor spoke up, her voice stronger than it had been. "No, you're not taking her arm." Dr. Patterson turned to her with barely concealed irritation. "Miss Henderson, I understand this is difficult, but medical decisions should be left to those with training and experience. Your emotional state is clouding your judgment." "My emotional state has nothing to do with it," Eleanor replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "I'm feeling what Catherine feels. Right now, through me, she's telling you that she wants to keep her arm. She's willing to take the risk." Catherine nodded weakly, confirming her sister's words. "Please," she whispered, "give me a chance. If infection comes, then you can do what you must, but don't take my arm without trying to save it first," Mrs. Mitchell interjected gently. "Dr. Patterson, perhaps we could wait a day or two, monitor for infection before making such a drastic decision." The doctor's jaw tightened. This was not how medicine was practiced. Patients, especially young women, did not dictate treatment. Their role was to trust the physician's superior knowledge and submit to his judgment. Yet he found himself in an awkward position, facing not just the patient, but her twin sister who claimed to feel her pain, her mother who clearly believed this fantastical story, and Mrs. Mitchell, whose family employed him. "Very well," he said stiffly. "We'll wait 24 hours. But I want it understood that this delay increases the risk significantly. If fever develops, if the wound shows signs of infection, we proceed immediately with amputation. I'll not have this young woman's death on my conscience because of sentiment and superstition." After Dr. Patterson left to prepare his medical supplies, Margaret sat between her daughters, one hand on each girl's shoulder. The three women formed a small circle of strength in that borrowed bedroom, defying the medical establishment and social conventions that would have them be passive and obedient. "Tell me how this works," Margaret said quietly. "Help me understand what you feel." Eleanor struggled to find words for something she had never fully articulated. "It's like we're two people sharing one nervous system. When something happens to Catherine, my body reacts as if it's happening to me. Not just pain, Mother, everything. When she's happy, I feel lighter. When she's afraid, my heart races. We've always been this way ever since we were babies. Catherine nodded, her eyes heavy from the drugs but focused on her mother's face. Father thinks we're hysterical. Dr. Morrison in Richmond told him it was a nervous condition common in twins, especially female twins. He prescribed bed rest and limited mental stimulation. Your father loves you both, but he doesn't understand, Margaret said. Men of his generation, they believe what they can see and measure. This connection you share, it frightens them because they can't explain it. What none of them knew was that their defiance of Dr. Patterson's recommendation would set in motion a series of events that would change not just their lives, but medical understanding itself. Word of the Henderson twins and their mysterious connection would spread through Richmond's medical community, attracting the attention of physicians who were beginning to question traditional approaches, who wondered if perhaps the human body and mind held secrets that couldn't be explained by bloodletting and laudanum. But that was still to come. For now, 3 women sat together in a plantation bedroom, betting Catherine's life on a bond that science couldn't explain, and most people refused to believe existed. The first 24 hours were crucial. Dr. Patterson visited every 4 hours, checking Catherine's temperature, examining the wound for signs of infection, and recording his observations in a leather-bound journal with meticulous detail. Each time he arrived, he found Eleanor sitting beside her sister's bed, the 2 girls holding hands, speaking in low voices that seemed to require no explanation between them. Margaret stayed as well, sleeping in a chair beside the window, waking at every sound. Mrs. Mitchell ensured they were fed and comfortable. Her natural hospitality extended, despite the strain of having a critically injured guest in her home. The Mitchell plantation operated around them, the daily rhythm of tobacco farming continuing, while Catherine fought for her arm and possibly her life. Eleanor discovered something during those long hours that she had never fully understood before. When she maintained physical contact with Catherine, focusing intently on her sister's sensations, she could somehow help regulate Catherine's pain. It wasn't magic or divine intervention, though many would later claim it was both. It was something far more complex, a shared nervous system that allowed one twin to partially absorb and redistribute the other's suffering. Dr. Patterson noticed this phenomenon during his evening visit. Catherine's pain seemed more manageable when Eleanor was present and touching her, despite receiving the same dosage of laudanum. When Eleanor stepped away to rest, Catherine's distress visibly increased. The doctor, trained to observe and document, couldn't ignore this pattern, though he had no framework to explain it. "This is highly irregular," he muttered, adjusting his spectacles and peering at both girls. "The patient's pain response correlates directly with her sister's proximity. I've never encountered such a thing in all my years of practice." "Because you've never treated twins like us before," Eleanor said simply. "Catherine and I have always known we're different. We've just learned to hide it because people are frightened by what they can't understand." "I'm not frightened, Miss Henderson. I'm skeptical. Medicine is based on observable, repeatable phenomena. What you're describing sounds more like mesmerism or spiritualism than legitimate medical science." "Call it what you want," Eleanor replied, her green eyes meeting his steadily. "But you can't deny what you're seeing. When I'm with her, she suffers less. That's a fact, regardless of whether you can explain it." By the second day, Catherine's condition had neither improved nor deteriorated significantly. The wound showed no obvious signs of infection, though Dr. Patterson remained vigilant for the telltale symptoms. Increasing redness, foul-smelling discharge, fever, red streaks radiating from the injury site. Catherine remained weak, drifting in and out of consciousness, her body focusing all its resources on healing. Eleanor, meanwhile, continued to exhibit her sister's symptoms. Her left arm remained painful and swollen, though there was no physical injury to account for it. She developed a low-grade fever that matched Catherine's, rising and falling in tandem. Margaret documented these occurrences, writing detailed notes in her own journal, creating a record that would later prove invaluable. On the third day, an unexpected visitor arrived. Dr. Henry Whitmore, a physician from the Medical College of Virginia in Richmond, had heard about the Henderson twins from Dr. Patterson, who had written to colleagues seeking advice on the unusual case. Whitmore was younger than Patterson in his early 40s, with a progressive reputation that made him somewhat controversial among his more traditional peers. Dr. Whitmore examined both Catherine and Eleanor with careful attention, asking questions that went beyond typical medical inquiry. He wanted to know about their childhood, about other instances when they had shared experiences across distance, about the exact nature of the sensations Eleanor felt. Unlike Dr. Patterson, he took notes without judgment, treating their accounts as legitimate medical data rather than female hysteria. There are documented cases of unusual connections between twins, Dr. Whitmore explained after his examination. Mostly dismissed as coincidence or imagination, but I've always wondered if there might be something more. The nervous system is not as well understood as we like to believe. Perhaps in identical twins, who begin as a single entity, some neural connection remains that we cannot observe or measure with current methods. You believe them? Mrs. Mitchell asked, clearly surprised. I believe what I observe, Dr. Whitmore replied, and I observe that Miss Eleanor Henderson exhibits physical symptoms that correlate precisely with her sister's injury, despite having no injury herself. I observe that the patient's pain decreases when her sister is present. These are facts. My job is to understand them, not dismiss them because they challenge existing medical theory. Dr. Patterson bristled at this implicit criticism of his skepticism. And what do you propose we do with these observations, Dr. Whitmore? Shall we write a paper suggesting that twins share a mystical connection that transcends physical distance? The medical community would laugh us out of our practices. Perhaps, Dr. Whitmore agreed. Or perhaps we're on the verge of understanding something fundamental about human neurology that we've been too rigid to see. Either way, our primary concern is treating Miss Catherine. And if her sister's presence aids in that treatment, then we should facilitate it, regardless of whether we understand the mechanism. That evening, as twilight settled over the Virginia countryside, Catherine opened her eyes with unusual clarity. Eleanor, who had been dozing in the bedside chair, immediately woke, their synchronization so precise it seemed choreographed. The pain is different, Catherine said softly. It's still there, but it's changing, becoming sharper in some places, duller in others. Dr. Whitmore, who had stayed for further observation, moved to examine her. Describe it more specifically. Catherine did, with Eleanor occasionally adding details from her own sympathetic sensations, creating a stereo description of pain that was both single and shared. Dr. Whitmore's eyes widened as he listened. What you're describing sounds like nerve regeneration. The pain pattern is consistent with healing tissue and reconnecting neural pathways. Miss Catherine, I believe your body is attempting to repair itself. This diagnosis brought both hope and concern. Nerve regeneration meant the arm might be saved, but it was also an excruciatingly painful process. For the next week, Catherine would experience sensations that would test her endurance and, by extension, Eleanor's as well. Dr. Patterson remained convinced that amputation was still the wisest course, but with infection held at bay and Catherine's fever gradually declining, he couldn't justify proceeding against the patient's wishes. Margaret sent word to her husband, Thomas Henderson, who had remained at their farm managing the property. He arrived the following morning, a tall man in his 50s with graying temples and the weathered face of someone who worked outdoors. Thomas was a practical man, uncomfortable with anything that couldn't be explained by logic and reason. The idea that his daughters shared some inexplicable connection had always troubled him, seeming too much like superstition or worse. Margaret, he said after seeing Catherine's condition, we need to discuss this situation rationally. Dr. Patterson has decades of experience. If he recommends amputation, we should consider it seriously. Catherine wants to keep her arm, Margaret replied firmly, and she's old enough to have a say in her own medical treatment. She's 21 years old and barely conscious half the time. Eleanor is influencing her decision, and Eleanor is not thinking clearly. This connection they claim to have, it's making both of them irrational. Margaret's eyes flashed with anger, a rare occurrence that made her husband step back. Thomas Henderson, I have watched our daughters for 21 years. I have documented incidents that you dismissed as coincidence. I have seen Eleanor cry out in pain the moment Catherine was injured. 3 miles away with no possible way of knowing. You can call it irrational if you want, but I call it real. And I will not let you or Dr. Patterson take Catherine's arm simply because what's happening doesn't fit into your understanding of how the world works. Thomas had never heard his wife speak to him this way. In their 25 years of marriage, Margaret had been soft-spoken, deferring to his judgment on important matters. But something had changed. She had crossed a line from acceptance to defiance, and he realized with surprise that he respected her more for it. "Very well," he said quietly. "We'll do this your way, but if infection sets in, if her condition worsens, we must act quickly. I won't lose a daughter because of stubbornness." "Neither will I," Margaret agreed. "That's why we're watching her so carefully." Over the following days, Catherine's condition slowly improved. The swelling in her arm began to decrease, though the pain remained intense. Eleanor stayed by her side constantly, their hands linked, creating a circuit that seemed to distribute the suffering between them. Dr. Whitmore visited daily, fascinated by what he was witnessing and frustrated by his inability to fully explain it. "I want to write about this case," he told Margaret during one visit. "With your permission, of course, not for publication immediately, but as documentation. What's happening here could be significant for understanding twins, nervous system function, pain management. The medical community needs to know about this." Margaret hesitated. Publicity could bring unwanted attention to her daughters, mark them as curiosities or worse, as frauds. But she also understood that staying silent meant this knowledge would be lost, that future twins might suffer without understanding they weren't alone in their experiences. "You may document the case," she agreed, "but the girls' identities must be protected. Refer to them only as Twin A and Twin B. I won't have them turned into circus attractions." Dr. Whitmore agreed readily. His interest was scientific, not sensational. He spent hours interviewing both Catherine and Eleanor, recording their descriptions of the connection, how it felt, when it was strongest, whether they could control it. Eleanor explained that they had learned to partially regulate the bond as they grew older, creating mental barriers when necessary, but also opening channels when they wanted to communicate or share experiences. "It's like having a door between our minds," Eleanor described. "When we're young, the door is always open. We had to learn to close it sometimes, to have our own thoughts and feelings, but we can open it again whenever we want or need to." This metaphor intrigued Dr. Whitmore. He wondered if perhaps all humans had such connections that atrophied with development, or if this was truly unique to certain twins. He theorized, correctly as it would turn out, that identical twins formed from a single fertilized egg might retain neural connections that other siblings didn't share. By the end of the second week, Catherine was sitting up in bed, her arm still bandaged but showing clear signs of healing. The bones would take months to fully mend, Dr. Patterson admitted grudgingly, but barring complications, she would keep her arm. It might never regain full strength or mobility, but it would be hers. Eleanor's sympathetic symptoms began to fade as Catherine healed, the phantom pain in her own arm gradually diminishing. The sisters could feel the connection between them settling back into its normal state, less urgent and consuming, returning to the background hum it had always been. On the day Catherine was finally able to leave the Mitchell plantation, both sisters thanked their hosts and the physicians who had treated them. Even Dr. Patterson, who remained skeptical of their claimed connection, acknowledged that the outcome had been better than he expected. As the Henderson carriage pulled away from the plantation, carrying them home, Catherine and Eleanor sat close together, their hands still linked. They had survived not just the physical injury, but the challenge to their shared identity, the skepticism of those who couldn't understand what they experienced. Their story wasn't over. It was, in many ways, just beginning. The Henderson farm welcomed them back with the familiar sense of earth and livestock, the modest two-story house standing solid against the Virginia sky. Word of Catherine's injury and miraculous recovery had spread through their small community, carried by servants and farmhands who traveled between properties. Neighbors arrived with casseroles and concerned questions, their curiosity barely concealed beneath polite inquiries about Catherine's health. Eleanor watched these visits with growing unease. She saw the way people looked at them now with a mixture of fascination and discomfort. Mrs. Thornton from the neighboring property actually crossed herself when she saw the twins together, as if warding off evil. Mr. Blackwell, who had known the family for years, suggested in hushed tones to Thomas that perhaps the girls should be examined by a specialist in nervous disorders, implying that their claims bordered on madness. Thomas Henderson found himself in an uncomfortable position. As a landowner and respected member of the community, his reputation mattered. Whispers that his daughters possessed some unnatural connection could damage the family's social standing, affect their ability to make advantageous marriages, even impact business relationships. Yet he had witnessed enough during Catherine's recovery to shake his certainty that this was mere female hysteria. Margaret, however, had no such doubts. She had spent 2 weeks documenting every instance of shared pain, every moment when Eleanor predicted Catherine's needs before they were spoken, every synchronized response that defied coincidence. Her journals filled with observations that would have fascinated Dr. Whitmore and horrified Dr. Patterson. Catherine's recovery progressed slowly through March and into April. The arm remained weak, requiring exercises and careful attention. Dr. Morrison from Richmond visited weekly, checking for infection and monitoring the healing bones. Unlike Dr. Patterson, Morrison was more willing to acknowledge what he couldn't explain, though he stopped short of endorsing the twins' claims of shared sensation. "The human body is remarkably resilient," he told Thomas during one visit. "Your daughter's arm is healing better than I expected. Whether her sister's presence contributed to that healing, I cannot say with medical certainty. But I also cannot deny that unorthodox approaches sometimes yield positive results." Eleanor resumed her normal activities gradually, helping her mother with household management and continuing her studies. The Henderson girls had been educated beyond what was typical for their class and gender, their mother believing that intelligent women made better wives and mothers. They read literature, studied basic mathematics and science, spoke passable French. This education now served Eleanor well as she tried to understand what she and Catherine experienced. She wrote letters to Dr. Whitmore, describing new observations about their connection. She noticed that emotional states transferred more readily than physical sensations when they weren't in close proximity. When Catherine felt anxious about her arm's recovery, Eleanor would feel inexplicable nervousness. When Catherine experienced joy at regaining movement in her fingers, Eleanor felt the same lightness of spirit. Dr. Whitmore responded enthusiastically, asking detailed questions that pushed Eleanor to articulate experiences she had never tried to explain before. Their correspondence became a scientific collaboration, unusual for the era when women were rarely taken seriously as contributors to medical knowledge. One afternoon in late April, Eleanor sat in the parlor reading one of Dr. Whitmore's letters when Catherine entered, her healing arm still supported by a sling. The sisters had barely spoken about the accident since returning home, both processing the trauma in their own ways. "Ellie," Catherine said, using the childhood nickname, "we need to talk about what happened. Not the accident itself, but everything after." Eleanor set down the letter. "What about it?" Catherine settled into the chair across from her, wincing slightly as she adjusted her arm. "People are talking. They think we're strange, possibly dangerous. I heard Mrs. Blackwell tell Mother that we should be examined by an alienist, that our claims of shared sensation are signs of mental derangement. Mrs. Blackwell is an ignorant woman who believes bloodletting cures everything, and that reading novels causes brain fever in women," Eleanor said sharply. "But she's not alone in her opinion," Catherine continued. "Father is worried. He hasn't said so directly, but I can see it in how he looks at us now. He's afraid we'll become unmarriageable, that no respectable man will want a wife with such peculiar afflictions." Eleanor felt anger rising, hot and fierce. "So we're supposed to pretend, to lie about what we experience just to make other people comfortable?" "I don't know what we're supposed to do," Catherine admitted. "But I know that if we continue talking openly about this connection, we'll be ostracized. We'll be treated as curiosities at best, lunatics at worst." The sisters sat in silence, the spring sunlight streaming through the windows, dust motes dancing in the beams. Outside, they could hear their father directing farmhands in the tobacco fields, the normal rhythms of agricultural life continuing regardless of their crisis. "Dr. Whitmore believes us," Eleanor said finally. He thinks what we experience could be important for understanding twins and the nervous system. He wants to study us properly, with scientific rigor." "And what would that mean?" Catherine asked. "Becoming specimens, being examined and prodded and questioned endlessly?" "It would mean proving we're not insane," Eleanor replied. "It would mean creating a record that other twins like us might find someday, so they don't feel so alone." Catherine considered this, her undamaged hand absently touching the sling supporting her healing arm. The injury had changed her in ways beyond the physical. She had faced death and survived, had defied medical authority and been proven right. She felt stronger now, more certain of her own judgment. "If we do this," Catherine said slowly, "if we allow Dr. Whitmore to study us, we need Mother's support, and Father's permission, unfortunately. We're unmarried women in 1853. We have no legal right to make such decisions independently." "Then we convince them," Eleanor said with determination. "We show them that this isn't shameful or dangerous. We're not possessed or insane. We're simply different, and that difference deserves to be understood rather than feared." That evening, the twins approached their parents together, presenting their case with careful logic. Margaret supported them immediately, her own observations aligning with what Dr. Whitmore proposed. Thomas took more convincing, but eventually agreed, with conditions. The study would be conducted discreetly, the girls' identities protected, and it would end immediately if it caused them distress or social harm. Dr. Whitmore arrived 2 weeks later with equipment and notebooks, ready to document what he believed might be one of the most significant medical cases of the decade. Dr. Henry Whitmore established himself in the Henderson household with the efficiency of a man accustomed to field research. He converted the small library into a makeshift examination room, filling it with medical instruments, notebooks, and scientific journals he had brought from Richmond. His approach was methodical and respectful, treating Eleanor and Catherine as collaborators rather than subjects, a courtesy rarely extended to women in medical research. The first week consisted primarily of interviews and baseline observations. Dr. Whitmore wanted to understand the full scope of their connection before designing specific experiments. He asked about their earliest memories, and Eleanor described how, as infants, they would cry in unison, even when separated into different rooms. Catherine recalled childhood games where they would try to guess what the other was thinking, succeeding far more often than chance would predict. "We thought all twins were like this," Eleanor explained during one session. "When we were 7, we met another pair of twins at church, the Morrison sisters. We asked them if they could feel each other's pain, and they looked at us like we were speaking a foreign language. That's when we realized we were different." Dr. Whitmore took meticulous notes, his pen scratching across paper as he documented every detail. "Did you tell anyone about this realization?" "We told Mother," Catherine said. "She believed us. But Father dismissed it as childish imagination. The Morrison incident taught us to be careful about what we shared with others." The doctor had them describe the sensation of their connection in precise detail. Eleanor explained it felt like having 2 simultaneous streams of sensory input, one from her own body and a fainter echo from Catherine's. The echo was strongest for pain and extreme emotions, weaker for ordinary sensations like hunger or fatigue. "Can you control it?" Dr. Whitmore asked. "Increase or decrease the intensity?" The twins exchanged glances. "To some extent," Eleanor answered. "We've learned to create mental barriers, especially as we got older and needed privacy. But during moments of crisis, like when Catherine was injured, the barriers dissolve. The connection becomes overwhelming." Dr. Whitmore designed experiments to test the boundaries of their connection. With Thomas Henderson's reluctant permission, he conducted trials where the twins were separated into different rooms. He would apply mild stimuli to one twin, a gentle pinprick or a drop of cold water on the skin, and observe whether the other reacted. The results were inconsistent but intriguing. Eleanor correctly identified when Catherine experienced stimulation about 60% of the time, far above the statistical probability of guessing. Margaret observed many of these sessions, her own notebooks filling with observations. She noticed that the twins' accuracy increased when they were relaxed and decreased when they were anxious or distracted. Environmental factors seemed to matter. On stormy days, their connection appeared stronger. During the new moon, it weakened slightly. Dr. Whitmore found these patterns fascinating but frustrating. Science demanded reproducible results, consistent outcomes that could be predicted and controlled. The Henderson twins defied such neat categorization. Their connection was real but variable, measurable but not fully predictable. "This is the challenge with studying human subjects," he told Margaret during a quiet afternoon. "They're not machines that respond identically to identical inputs. They have moods, distractions, physical variations that affect outcomes. What I'm documenting here may not be scientifically rigorous enough for publication, but it's still valuable data." As May arrived, bringing warmer weather and blooming dogwoods, Dr. Whitmore expanded his research. He brought in Dr. Morrison, the local physician, to provide a second medical perspective. Morrison remained skeptical, but admitted the evidence was compelling. Together they conducted more sophisticated experiments, measuring pulse rates and body temperature, looking for physiological correlations to the reported sensations. They discovered that when one twin experienced pain, both exhibited elevated heart rates, even when separated. When Catherine's healing arm ached particularly badly, Eleanor's pulse would quicken in sympathy. This objective, measurable data impressed even Dr. Morrison, who had previously attributed everything to hysteria. The research attracted attention despite efforts at discretion. Dr. Whitmore mentioned the case in a letter to a colleague at Harvard Medical School, describing it only as an unusual twin phenomenon. That colleague mentioned it to another, and soon physicians throughout the eastern states were expressing interest. Some were skeptical, dismissing it as pseudoscience. Others were intrigued, seeing possibilities for understanding human neurology and consciousness. Thomas Henderson grew increasingly uncomfortable with the attention. One evening at dinner, he expressed his concerns. "This has gone far enough. We agreed to limited study, not turning our home into a medical curiosity. I've heard whispers in town, questions about what that Richmond doctor is doing here." "He's documenting something important," Margaret countered, "something that could help other twins, could expand medical knowledge." "At what cost?" Thomas demanded. "Our daughters' reputations? Our families' standing in the community? I've already had men hint that they wouldn't consider marriage proposals from girls with such peculiar afflictions." Eleanor felt her anger flare. "So we're supposed to hide who we are to make ourselves acceptable to men who would reject us for being different? What kind of marriage would that be?" "A normal one," Thomas said tiredly. "One that provides security and respectability. You're 21 years old, both of you. By this age, most women are married with children. Instead, you're participating in medical experiments that make people nervous." Catherine spoke up, her voice calm but firm. "Father, I nearly died 2 months ago. That experience changed how I think about life and what matters. I don't want to spend my remaining years pretending to be someone I'm not, just to satisfy social conventions." "Easy words for someone who's never faced real hardship," Thomas retorted. "Wait until you're older, unmarried, dependent on family charity. Then tell me how much social conventions matter." The argument continued through dinner, neither side yielding. Dr. Whitmore, who had been invited to join them, remained diplomatically silent, though his sympathies clearly lay with the twins. He had seen too many cases of women's experiences dismissed as hysteria, too many opportunities for medical advancement lost because they challenged conventional thinking. Later that night, Eleanor stood by her bedroom window, looking out over the darkened fields. Catherine joined her, the sisters standing together in comfortable silence. "Do you think Father is right?" Catherine asked quietly. "Are we ruining our chances at normal lives?" Eleanor considered the question carefully. "I think normal is overrated. What we have, this connection, it's extraordinary. Frightening sometimes, overwhelming, but also beautiful. We share something that most people never experience. Why should we hide that to make others comfortable?" "Because society punishes women who don't conform," Catherine said pragely. "You know that as well as I do." "Then perhaps society needs to change," Eleanor replied, "and maybe we're part of that change, whether we intended to be or not." June brought oppressive heat to Virginia, the kind that made the air feel thick and suffocating. Dr. Whitmore concluded his formal study, though he continued corresponding with the twins regularly. His final report, carefully anonymized, documented dozens of instances where Eleanor and Catherine demonstrated awareness of each other's physical and emotional states beyond what coincidence could explain. He submitted it to the Virginia Medical Journal with hope but realistic expectations about how it would be received. The publication of Dr. Whitmore's findings in August created a storm of controversy. Some physicians praised his rigorous methodology and called for further research into twin phenomena. Others dismissed the entire study as unscientific speculation, suggesting that the subjects had somehow deceived him or that he had unconsciously influenced the results. A few went further, questioning his professional judgment and suggesting he had been manipulated by hysterical women. Dr. Patterson from the Mitchell Plantation wrote a scathing response, arguing that his recommendation for amputation had been the medically sound approach and that the positive outcome in Catherine's case was luck rather than validation of any mystical connection. He implied that Dr. Whitmore had allowed sentiment to cloud his scientific judgment. The Henderson family felt the repercussions immediately. Invitations to social events dried up. Women who had been Margaret's friends for years suddenly became too busy for visits. Thomas faced awkward conversations with business associates who wondered aloud whether his daughters were truly well or if the family needed to seek treatment at an institution for nervous disorders. Eleanor and Catherine handled the ostracism differently. Eleanor threw herself into reading and correspondence, connecting with other women interested in scientific and medical topics. She discovered a small but growing community of female intellectuals who challenged traditional limitations on women's education and participation in scholarly discourse. Through letters, she found acceptance and encouragement that her local community withheld. Catherine focused on physical recovery, working diligently with exercises Dr. Morrison prescribed for her arm. The injury had healed better than expected, though she would never regain full strength or range of motion. She learned to adapt, finding new ways to accomplish tasks that had once been effortless. The experience gave her patience and resilience she hadn't possessed before. In September, an unexpected visitor arrived. Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell, the first woman to receive a medical degree in the United States, traveled from New York specifically to meet the Henderson twins. She had read Dr. Ito Whitmore's article and was fascinated by the implications for understanding female physiology and neurology. Dr. Blackwell was 42 years old, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a direct manner that some found off-putting, but Eleanor and Catherine found refreshing. She spoke to them as equals, asked probing questions about their experiences, and shared her own struggles as a woman in medicine. "The medical establishment will dismiss anything that challenges their assumptions," she told them during her visit, "especially if it involves women as anything other than patients. They dismissed me as a curiosity, said a woman's brain couldn't handle the rigors of medical training. I proved them wrong, and you can do the same." "We're not trying to become physicians," Catherine said. "We just want people to understand that what we experience is real." "Understanding begins with documentation," Dr. Blackwell replied. "Dr. Whitmore's study is a start, but you need to become your own documentarians. Keep detailed journals of your experiences. Record everything, the successful predictions and the failures. Over time, you'll build a body of evidence that's harder to dismiss." She spent 3 days with the family, conducting her own examinations and observations. Unlike the male physicians who had studied them, Dr. Blackwell asked questions about their menstrual cycles, emotional states, and other aspects of female experience that male doctors either ignored or considered inappropriate to discuss. "I've noticed that our connection seems stronger during certain times of the month," Eleanor confided during one of these conversations, "but I've never mentioned it to Dr. Whitmore. It felt too personal." "That's exactly the kind of detail that matters," Dr. Blackwell said. "The female body is not simply a variation of the male body. It has its own rhythms and patterns that affect everything from cognition to pain perception. If your connection varies with your cycle, that's crucial information." Before leaving, Dr. Blackwell gave them advice that would shape their future. "You have a choice to make. You can hide your differences, marry conventional men, live conventional lives, and always wonder what might have been. Or you can embrace what makes you unique, contribute to expanding human knowledge, and accept that the path will be difficult but meaningful. Neither choice is wrong, but only you can decide which one you can live with. Her words resonated deeply with both twins. That night they talked until dawn, weighing their options and considering their futures. By morning, they had reached a decision. They would not marry. Not yet, perhaps not ever. Instead, they would dedicate themselves to documenting and understanding their connection. They would work with researchers like Dr. Whitmore and Dr. Blackwell, who took them seriously. They would contribute to medical knowledge in whatever way they could, even if it meant defying social expectations. Thomas was horrified when they announced their decision. "You're throwing away your futures on a whim. What will you do when I'm gone and you have no husband to support you?" "We'll support ourselves," Eleanor said calmly. "We've been helping Mother manage the household accounts for years. We understand finance and business. We can work as tutors or governesses if necessary." "Respectable women don't work," Thomas protested. "Unmarried women without independent means work all the time," Catherine countered. "They just do it quietly, out of public view. At least we're being honest about our intentions." Margaret surprised everyone by supporting her daughters. "Thomas, they're adults. They have a right to choose their own paths, even if those paths differ from what we envisioned for them. And truthfully, I'd rather have them unmarried and independent than trapped in marriages to men who can't accept who they are." The argument that followed was fierce, but ultimately futile. The twins had made up their minds, and nothing their father said would change them. Thomas eventually retreated to his study, frustrated and hurt that his daughters were choosing such an unconventional path. Over the following months, Eleanor and Catherine established a routine. They continued their documentation, keeping parallel journals that recorded both their individual experiences and their shared sensations. They corresponded with physicians and researchers throughout the country, sharing observations and learning about other cases of unusual twin connections. They discovered they weren't alone. Other twins reported similar experiences, though usually in more limited forms. Some felt intuitions about their twins' well-being. Others shared dreams or experienced synchronized emotions. None reported the level of connection Eleanor and Catherine possessed, but the existence of these cases suggested their experience existed on a spectrum, rather than being completely unique. By the time winter arrived again, nearly a year after Catherine's injury, the twins had become quietly famous in certain medical circles. Their case was debated in journals, discussed at medical conferences, used as evidence both for and against various theories about consciousness and the nervous system. The spring of 1855 brought unexpected changes. Dr. Whitmore secured funding from the Medical College of Virginia to conduct a long-term study of twin phenomena, with Eleanor and Catherine as primary subjects. The arrangement would provide them with a small stipend and legitimacy, allowing them to continue their documentation while contributing to formal research. Thomas, seeing that his daughters were determined to pursue this path regardless of his approval, negotiated terms that protected the family's reputation as much as possible. The twins would work from home rather than residing at the medical college. Their identities would remain protected in publications. They would maintain appropriate social behavior and avoid any actions that might be considered scandalous. The research took on new dimensions as Dr. Whitmore brought in colleagues from different specialties. A neurologist from Philadelphia examined them, fascinated by the possibility that their shared sensations indicated some physical connection between their nervous systems. A psychologist from Boston studied their emotional synchronization, looking for patterns in how feelings transferred between them. Eleanor and Catherine became adept at describing their experiences in clinical terms, translating subjective sensations into language that physicians could understand and document. They learned anatomy and physiology, reading medical texts to better comprehend what was happening in their bodies. This education, unusual for women of their era, gave them agency in their own story. The work was demanding, but fulfilling. For the first time, their differences were valued rather than feared. They were contributing to something larger than themselves, helping build a foundation of knowledge that might benefit future generations of twins. Their personal lives evolved as well. Eleanor developed a close friendship with Dr. Sarah Clark, one of the few female physicians in Virginia who had trained under Dr. Blackwell in New York. Catherine formed a bond with Margaret Watson, a widow who ran a successful boarding house in Richmond and defied conventional expectations about women's capabilities. These relationships provided models for lives outside traditional marriage, showing the twins that women could build meaningful, independent existences. They watched their friends navigate a world that was often hostile to female autonomy, finding ways to thrive despite social constraints. In June 1855, Dr. Whitmore presented a comprehensive paper at the American Medical Association conference in Philadelphia. It detailed 3 years of research with the Henderson twins, including quantitative data, case studies, and theoretical frameworks for understanding their connection. The presentation was met with mixed reactions, some physicians applauding the rigorous methodology, while others remained deeply skeptical. But something had shifted. The conversation was happening. Questions were being asked about twins, consciousness, the nervous system, the nature of human connection. Even critics had to engage with the evidence rather than simply dismissing it as hysteria. Eleanor and Catherine did not attend the conference, their identities still protected, but they read the accounts in medical journals, saw their experiences debated by learned men, and felt both vindicated and frustrated. Vindicated that they were being taken seriously, frustrated that they couldn't participate directly in discussions about their own lives. One evening in late summer, the twins sat on the porch watching fireflies dance across the darkening fields. Catherine's arm had healed as well as it ever would, the injury now just part of her history rather than defining her present. Eleanor had just received a letter from a pair of twins in Massachusetts who had read about their case and wanted to share their own experiences. "Do you ever regret it?" Catherine asked, "choosing this path instead of the conventional one?" Eleanor considered the question carefully. "Sometimes I wonder what life would have been like if we had married, had children, lived quietly. But then I remember how it felt to be dismissed, to have our experiences called hysteria or imagination. I think about the other twins who will read Dr. Whitmore's research and realize they're not alone. And no, I don't regret it." "Neither do I," Catherine agreed, "though I wouldn't have predicted this future a few years ago." Their father emerged from the house, his expression softer than it had been in months. Age and experience had mellowed his rigid views, helped him see that his daughter's unconventional choices didn't diminish their worth or his love for them. "Girls," he said, using the familiar term despite their being grown women, "I've been thinking. Your mother and I won't be here forever. I want to make arrangements to ensure you're provided for, that you can continue your work without financial worry." The gesture moved both twins deeply. It was Thomas's way of accepting their choices, of showing support even if he didn't fully understand their path. As the years passed, Eleanor and Catherine continued their collaboration with researchers, their case becoming a foundational study in understanding twins. They never married, building instead a life centered on intellectual pursuit, meaningful friendships, and the unique bond they shared. Catherine's injury, which had nearly cost her life and her arm, became a turning point that changed not just her trajectory, but contributed to medical understanding. The decision to save her arm rather than amputate had been vindicated, and the documentation of her recovery provided valuable information about healing and pain management. Eleanor's ability to sense her sister's pain, once dismissed as impossible, became recognized as a real if poorly understood phenomenon. Their case opened doors for more nuanced thinking about consciousness, identity, and the connections that bind humans together. The Henderson twins lived into their 70s, dying within hours of each other in 1907, their connection lasting until the very end. The extensive documentation they left behind, journals spanning 50 years, became an invaluable resource for researchers studying twins, neurology, and the nature of human bonds. Their story, once considered too strange to be believed, became part of medical history. It showed that sometimes the most important discoveries come from taking seriously what conventional wisdom dismisses. It demonstrated that women's experiences, when properly documented and studied, contribute essential knowledge to human understanding. In the end, Eleanor and Catherine Henderson proved that being different wasn't something to hide or cure. It was something to understand, to document, to share with a world that was slowly learning to see beyond its narrow definitions of normal. Their legacy lived on in medical journals, in research that built upon their case, in other twins who found validation in their story. Two sisters who felt each other's pain across miles had transformed that mysterious connection into something the world could begin to understand, one carefully documented observation at a time. Every family hides secrets, some so dark they should never see the light of day. Here, we open the doors to those shadowed pasts, uncovering hidden crimes, silent pacts, and stories that echo like ghosts through the halls of memory. If you've made it this far, it means you also carry that forbidden curiosity. So don't hesitate. Subscribe to the channel now, turn on the bell, and follow our next revelations. Because every day, new secrets emerge, and only those who dare to face the truth remain to hear them.